Muslims are not terrorists.
That's David Cameron's cabinet.
Muslims are not terrorists.
That's David Cameron's cabinet.
Say it loud, say it clear.
2015 saw a number of devastating terrorist attacks that shook the world and dominated mainstream medias worldwide. As a result of these terrorist attacks, hate crimes towards Muslims have increased drastically.
We don't want to have another person die for what they represent, for them just living their lives.
Mohsin Ahmed, he could have been anybody. He could have been anybody peacefully going about his business, and he was killed.
Studies have indicated that the media plays a significant role through its negative reporting and association of Islam with terrorism.
Sometimes those connections are difficult to break if Muslims are not appearing in the media in other ways.
Are the media just reporting on what's already there, or are they indirectly or directly fueling Islamophobia?
I can't answer that. I'm just not qualified to answer that. I'm really sorry.
And with strong themes on British values and their incompatibility with Islam, I asked people what they think it means to be British.
I have no idea.
It's a good question. Good questions.
That is the question, isn't it?
I set out to find out how people perceive the media in terms of its role in perpetuating Islamophobia. My grandparents' generation were one of the first waves of Pakistanis to immigrate to the UK. It was a change for them and British-born citizens alike. My father told me how they experienced racism by being considered lesser in stature due to their pigmentation. Much of what my family experienced was influenced by the media portrayal of immigrants at that time. Islam was rarely mentioned in the papers, and when it was when mosques were being built, as Islam was something new in those communities and an object of curiosity surrounded it. Growing up, I never seemed to question Islam. It seemed more like a tradition attached to my culture. I just accepted it as part of upbringing. Then post 9/11, everything changed. Those previous racial attitudes slowly started being replaced by a word that encapsulated not only race but religion: terrorist. I was 9 when 9/11 happened. I can still recall the events, sat in my grandfather's house fixated to the TV watching the news unfold. After 9/11, Muslims and ethnic minorities started to become much more visible in the mainstream media, but not always in a good way. It was then I realized the sheer power of the media and its importance in terms of understanding the world. Since then, I took an interest in media, studying it in high school and college, and then going on further to study journalism at university. All of which has led me to this point, as I attempt to explore the relations between the British media and Islamophobia.
Hi guys, it's Asad Shan and I'm nominated for Best TV Presenter at the Asian Media Awards.
Paul Mayeda Burgess and I'm here with Bend It Like Beckham the musical.
I'm Ranveer Singh, I work for ITV.
I'm Dean. And I'm Rav and we are Punjabi Hit Squad.
This event will showcase the very best Asian talent working in both Asian and mainstream media.
As a young Asian journalist, I was granted the opportunity to attend the Asian Media Awards, which brings Asians together from various media platforms, celebrating their efforts, talents and contribution to British media. I asked people how significant these awards are in raising the profiles of Asians within the UK broadcast industry.
I think there's a lot of stereotypes around Asians within the media industry anyway, but things like this is what helps us, and we need more of this, to be honest. It's definitely a positive thing, but I think we need a lot more of them.
I think it's a really good way for particularly those from ethnic minorities to get recognised. And also because of the type of event that it is, it's got quite a large scale as well. It's great that ITV is supporting it as well, so I think that just shows the ambition behind it as well and how far this can really go. So I think looking at it from that perspective, it's really positive.
I think there's a very heavy focus on stereotypes, and that's what the tabloid projects us as, but I think it's slowly changing now. I think in the sort of mainstream media, there's a lot of prominent Asian media personalities out there which has kind of changed all of that.
I think the main thing is that all the people here in one room and they're conversating and they're talking about future projects, and all things can come together and new things can develop something from this. So that's why I think it's very important to be here.
If you just look at social media right now, the digital age, it's making noise. More importantly, if people are going to win, they're going to start tweeting, Facebooking, so people will be aware of it, people will be inspired, people want to work harder. So yeah, I think that...
we always hear the fact that Asians are not represented enough in the mainstream media in Britain, etc. But what we don't think about is that not enough Asians are in media themselves. So there needs to be more of a grassroots kind of push from that level, rather than kind of fighting top down all the time. We need to, ultimately both are important, but I think we need to work on getting more Asians into media in the first place.
I think the way we tell stories, negative stories, which inevitably happen in all sorts of communities, we've got a responsibility as journalists to tell them responsibly.
Since most stories about Islam are in fact negative, how much does this play a part in fueling Islamophobia? At such a positive event, I thought it would be interesting to put people on the spot, asking them what they thought is fueling the rise in Islamophobia.
I think it's a combination of things. Obviously some people will think the media has a part to play, and not getting the right kind of press doesn't help the situation, but it's a number of things.
I think it's a complicated picture, but I also think within the community there are not enough voices within the Muslim community who say we are law-abiding. I think people need to stand up from within the community and make the case as well, and not just assume that people will make the case.
But is the onus really on Muslims to prove that their religion is being misrepresented?
أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله.
Member of the European Parliament and family friend Afzal Khan is a Muslim who has grown up enshrined within his local community. I wanted to get the views of someone who has closely dealt with political issues regarding various races and religions on a global platform.
Look at our own Prime Minister, David Cameron. It's an issue. Because if you look at one of his major speech he did on this whole difficulties on terrorism and the Muslim community, how he really mixed it all up. For example, he talked about forced marriage. Now, forced marriage is not a Muslim issue. Forced marriage is a cultural issue of different communities and different faiths. He talked about female genital mutilation, FGM. It's not a Muslim issue at all. Many of the countries in Africa are actually Christian. 90%, 95% of the population there is Christian. Now there is also some Muslims who happen to be from Africa. So it's actually an African issue, but he was quite comfortable in putting it at the doorstep of the Muslims. And there are many other examples that I can give you how he failed in that speech. The negative areas, which actually had nothing to do with the Muslims, but he put it with the Muslim community. And if a prime minister of a country can do such a fundamental mistake, can you imagine what others are doing? When you get something like 90% of the media's coverage is negative, and we know how powerful media is, this then translates into ordinary people. For them, this is what Islam is, this is what Muslims are, and this is what's exactly distorting this whole image. And it's having a huge consequences for the Muslims themselves. So I think there is an issue with the media, and media needs to be aware of this, and they need to really look at the wider responsibility. Look at their own culture, because I don't think that's healthy. And the second is, what this specifically on the Muslim point, the impact that's having on community relations, and the impact it's having also on the Muslims, because many of them are retreating and even becoming more conservative. It's a situation which all minority communities go through. If you pile pressure on them, they retreat to their own safety.
How much of this responsibility does the mainstream media face within the way information about Muslims is disseminated? I wanted to get the views of Muslims who work within the mainstream media, so I spoke with two prominent Muslim figures within the BBC, Rahila Bano, who's been working for the BBC for 26 years, and Aziz Rashid, the head of BBC Northwest.
We hear a lot of news about terrorism at the moment, and that's purely because there is a public interest in the story.
News reports newsworthy events, that's what it means. It's something unusual. So when the news is reporting things that are unusual, but that's the only time that Muslims appear in the news, it is very easy for people to associate Muslims with terrorism.
And I know many people do actually blame the media for creating that perception, or some sectors of the media for creating that perception, negative perception of Muslims, which leads people to associate terrorism with Muslims.
The media in some areas is portraying Muslims as they are in everyday life. But if all you consume is the news and you don't watch that stuff, and if you don't live with Muslims or know Muslim, have Muslim friends, you may think that all Muslims, you may associate that with what you see in the newspapers or see on the news. Now, is that the fault of the media, or is that your fault for not being able to tell the difference?
I mean, we have to be impartial in our coverage. That means that if we speak to somebody from one side, we have to counterbalance that with a statement or an interview from the other side as well, to make sure that, both sides of the argument, so to speak, are represented. Although, I'm well aware that, the BBC is targeted by some Muslims who feel that that's not always the case.
You can't just blame this on the media, because but the media has an important role to play, and there are some parts of the media that I believe are irresponsible and who make the situation worse.
Tabloid papers get splashed across social media, and then the whole of the media gets tainted, or if there's one incident that happens, the whole of the media gets tainted with the same brush.
A lot of people are suspicious of some Muslim people, and the causes of that are some of the actions of Muslims, the actions of Muslims in Britain, the actions of Muslims in the world.
I think the media certainly has a role to play in terms of promoting not just negative stereotypes of Muslims, and also perhaps covering more positive stories about Muslims.
So it's everyone's responsibility, it's ordinary people's responsibility, but it's also Muslim community's responsibility to reach out and to, have a dialogue with people and take part in British life. But I think that's what most Muslims are actually doing, but it doesn't seem to be, reflected sometimes, and people don't seem to see that side of it.
Some people aren't seeing the positive side at all. Statistics show that hate crimes towards Muslims have increased by over 65% in London alone, with government plans to make anti-Muslim offences a separate category within hate crimes. I headed to Rotherham to attend a protest in memory of an 81-year-old man who was subject to anti-Muslim hate crime.
We are here today because we are mourning the death of an 81-year-old innocent man who was killed for no other crime than the crime of being a Muslim.
We don't want to have another person die for what they represent, for them just living their lives.
Mohsin Ahmed, he could have been anybody. He could have been anybody peacefully going about his business, and he was killed. It could be anybody's father or anybody's grandfather, and that's why we must raise our voices against this injustice.
Mohsin Ahmed, an 81-year-old Muslim man from Rotherham, was attacked in August earlier this year. He was on his way to the morning prayer at his local mosque when he was found on the floor with serious injuries. After being sent to the hospital, he died later that night. Community worker Maxine Bowler deals with these sort of issues regarding people from different faiths and beliefs. She told me that she isn't surprised Muslims are getting angry.
To be honest, they are being prodded and prodded and prodded. The Charlie Hebdo stuff, right? I mean, I like the idea of free speech, but I think free speech has to come with responsibility. If you put images of the Prophet Muhammad and you prod, I think that was just like what they did to the Jews in the 1930s, to be honest. And again, I hate the idea of people being killed. but quite frankly, the way in which that was portrayed as well was a problem to me. So I think Islamophobia is sort of almost the last form of respectable racism.
Not long after the 1 minute silence from Mohsin Ahmed, we started hearing chants from over the police barricades. Britain First were marching in response to the grooming gangs involving Pakistani Muslim men around the UK. Maxine told me that as well as the affiliation with terrorism, the portrayal of grooming gangs is another cause of Islamophobia.
And I care about the child abuse scandal. But what I hate is the way in which they want to say that it's all Muslims who are responsible for this. We know that the truth is that most abuse cases take place by white people, but they don't want to put that in the press. They don't want to say that's the reality. And I think we have to be loud and clear that we want justice for victims, but do not allow the racists to get away with blaming all Muslims.
They've almost made the word groomer synonymous with being Muslim, just like they used to do the black mugger, really. And it's a disgrace, really, when you think about Jimmy Savile, the establishment, who actually are up to their eyes in child abuse, corruption, and there'll be much, much more of this comes out. And also, the last report that came out from a charity in this city said that most child abuse is done by white people, not Muslims. And I think, again, that you don't hear that, do you? It's like the headline news is Muslim groomers.
Does this then suggest that certain news broadcasters have an anti-Muslim bias going beyond just reporting newsworthy events? According to a survey on the Northwest newspaper Asian Image, an independent poll claimed that a great majority of British Muslims believe that the BBC, ITV and Sky have an anti-Muslim bias.
Muslims are not terrorists. That's David Cameron's cabinet. Muslims are not terrorists. That's David Cameron's cabinet. Say it loud, say it clear.
A YouGov poll commissioned by the charity Islamic Relief found that the British people associate Islam with terrorism over any other quality. How has this association been made, and most importantly, who is responsible for it? I spoke to Chair of the Greater Manchester Stop the War Coalition, Naila Ashraf, at the protests against the airstrike in Syria. Naila suggested that there is a bigger agenda at play.
We've seen a huge increase in Islamophobic attacks against Muslims up and down the country, and in particular against Muslim women. And they talk about women not being integrated and all the rest of it, about us being oppressed. But the thing that's oppressing us is a fear of going out because we're going to get attacked by the racists, because our leaders, have connected terrorism with Muslims, and therefore we all feel under threat.
We say welfare! Welfare!
Well, I think it's shocking how they've whipped up a lot of the racism. I mean, the headlines that you have are disgusting. We all know about the Sun headline, but actually they're not the only ones. And it's not just, the gutter press. The mainstream press are happy to, write huge editorials about Muslims, about the religion, how it needs to change. You can't imagine them doing that about Jewish people anymore, but for somehow it's okay to talk about Islam in that way.
And I think this is the racism they used to justify their war, and they've used it for the last 15 years.
I think, the press in this country and the government, the politicians, have got a drive for war, and it's absolutely disgusting. You only have to look at how they've attacked Jeremy Corbyn, for coming out and saying he's against war. Even now, all his members in the Labour Party support his position. Hundreds of people, thousands actually, up and down the country support Jeremy Corbyn. They're making out that somehow he's, terrible for the country, he's putting his personal, ideas before the safety of the British people. I don't think he is, but I think the press have to take some responsibility for that.
Because it's not about words, it is about actions. And if politicians in Parliament don't act, well, the British people have shown yet again that they will act.
I think the war on terror hasn't helped at all. When you bomb innocent Afghanis, when you bomb innocent Iraqis, and then you get surprised that they fight back, what do? You have to blame it something on their ideology. They don't like democracy, they don't like Western democracy. Prior to the Afghan war and the Iraq war, I was just a British person, I was an Asian, but ever since that war I've now become a Muslim, and everyone refers to me as if that's the most important part of me, as if that comes before me being British or being a student or a professional or anything else. I think that's what's created Islamophobia in our society.
So is it possible to be British and a Muslim? A recent survey by YouGov has shown that a staggering 55% of British voters currently believe that Islam is incompatible with British values, with just a mere 22% who think Islam is compatible. Being British and Muslim, I personally have no idea what the collective British values are that I should have. So I decided to ask people what they think British values means to them.
God, what do I think it means to be British?
I struggle with this idea.
I have no idea.
It's a good question.
It's a really difficult question to answer.
Good questions.
Wow. That is the question, isn't it?
British?
It can be a lot of things, can't it, really? You know, the way you speak, the way you talk, the way British passport, does that mean that you're British? Not necessarily. It's how you act.
For myself, to be British would be quite simply to have that British nationality. To be born in Britain is one way. To have immigrated over, and if you live in this society, you contribute into this society, you're a part of this society, then you might as well call yourself British.
Completely different to what it was, say, 20 years ago. I mean, Britain's one big culture with lots of different people and lots of different values and opinions and people from different walks of life, so I don't really think there is an actual definition of what Britain is. It means to complain about the weather a lot. It means to be constantly cold. It means to be polite. To have somebody knock into you on the street and say, "I'm sorry for it." To be open and understanding. To be British, to me, it's not about the colour of your skin. It's a mentality of thinking. It's to be really open-minded and really accepting.
It is apparent that people have different ideas of what British values actually are. What seems strange to me is that despite the constant emphasis of British values in the media, there is no clear explanation as to what defines these values. With such vague messages and the constant negative rhetoric used by the British media, with little emphasis on anything else, it seems as if we've forgotten what the positives actually are.